The message came at 6:14 in the morning. Every screen on Earth turned on at the same time. Phones, televisions, the big screens in city squares, the small ones inside hospital rooms and corner shops and cockpits of planes mid-flight. Every single one of them lit up with the same face, tall, pale blue, 4 eyes arranged in a square, dressed in armor that looked like it had never seen a scratch. The alien spoke for 11 minutes. Its voice was deep and flat, like a bell struck underwater. Translators built into the broadcast pushed the words into 193 languages at the same time. The message was simple. The Vel sovereignty, a galactic empire 6,000 years old, made up of 40 different species, rulers of over 300 star systems, was giving Earth one chance to surrender. Submit now, become a subject world. Give up control of Earth's military and resources, and the sovereignty would allow humans to live. Refuse, and the 40 warships holding position above Earth's moon, would be the smallest problem humans ever faced. The alien on screen paused at the end. It seemed to be waiting for something. Some reaction, maybe, some visible fear. 40 warships sat above the moon like a held breath. On Earth, in a building with no windows and too much coffee, General Junho read the transcript on a paper printout. He still used paper. His staff had stopped questioning it. He read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set it face down on his desk and picked up his coffee cup and drank from it slowly. His aide, a young man named Daoyun, stood near the door and waited. Junho set the cup down. Has the Admiral been briefed? Yes, sir. What did she say? Daoyun hesitated. She laughed, sir. Junho nodded. He picked up the printout again and folded it once neatly and put it in his jacket pocket. Good, he said. Then he stood up and walked to the door. Schedule the joint call, 1 hour. That was all. Ambassador Nari had been in space for 7 months. She had been Earth's last official voice inside sovereignty-controlled neutral territory, living on a station the size of a small city, attending meetings full of creatures who had long since decided what humanity was. Small, new, unimportant, a curiosity at best, a minor obstacle at worst. She had smiled through all of it. She was still smiling when the grand emissary of the sovereignty opened the final diplomatic channel. He was tall even for his species, and he wore the declaration of war the way some beings wear expensive clothes, proud of the weight of it, sure it meant something about him. He told her that Earth had 72 hours to respond. He told her the sovereignty had never failed to take a world it had chosen. He told her that resistance would only determine how much of the planet survived the process. He told her this was mercy. Nari listened. She had a very good face for listening, still, patient. The kind of face that gave nothing away, the kind that made people keep talking because they weren't sure you understood yet. The emissary kept talking. He used words like asterisk, inevitable asterisk, and efficient and generous. He listed the battles the sovereignty had won in the last 100 years. He listed the species that had tried to resist. He listed what had happened to them. Nari let him finish. Then she smiled at him, not the polite smile she used in meetings. The other one, the quiet one, the smile that belonged to people who already knew the end of the story and were simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She said, "You should have researched us better." She cut the feed. The sovereignty's strategic analysis team reviewed human military capability over the next 12 hours. They were thorough. They were also, in the way that only truly confident people can be, not worried. Earth had functional faster-than-light travel, but slow. Their ships were solid but not numerous. They had no conquered territories, no galactic allies, no history of interspecies warfare. Their weapons technology was estimated at roughly 1/3 of sovereignty standard. Their largest fleet engagement on record was a defensive skirmish 40 years ago against a group of raiders that most sovereignty species considered barely a threat. The lead analyst presented his findings to the sovereignty's war council. He used clean charts and sharp numbers. He concluded with a projection, 6 weeks to full subjugation. He called it conservative. A general in the back of the room said it sounded generous. They laughed. On Earth, Director Sohi did not laugh. She sat in her office in the department no one outside the building knew existed, and she pulled a file from her drawer. It was thick, over 800 pages. She had started it 4 years ago when the sovereignty's expansion patterns first crossed a line she recognized. She had submitted reports. She had requested meetings. She had sent summaries to people with the power to act on them. Nobody listened. The file was titled simply, "When They Come." She opened it to the first page. At the top, in the space she had left blank on purpose, she wrote today's date. The ink was still wet when she closed it and set it to her right and opened her laptop. There was a lot of work to do. 6 hours after Nari cut the channel, the Joint Command call connected. 14 faces on screen: generals, fleet commanders, intelligence chiefs. The director of Earth's only weapons development black site. Some of them had been awake all night. Some of them had never really slept at all, the kind of people who treated sleep the same way they treated vacation, as a thing other people did. Junho spoke for 4 minutes. Not about fear. Not about the size of the sovereignty's fleet or the history of their empire or the 72-hour deadline. He talked about supply lines. He talked about docking rotation schedules. He talked about a strategy that had no name yet, only a shape that required patience and pain tolerance and time. He asked if anyone in the call had a problem with what he was describing. Nobody spoke. Murray, her face in the top right corner of the grid, had a coffee cup in her hand and an expression that looked almost bored. She said, "I need 3 days and then I'm ready." "You have 2, Junho said. She shrugged, "Fine." The call ended. Outside, the 40 sovereignty warships above the moon had not moved. They were visible to the naked eye if you knew where to look, little hard lights in a pattern that shouldn't have been there. People across the world stood in streets and backyards and rooftops and stared up at them. Some people cried. Some people prayed. Some people took photos and went back inside. In a small food stall near the coast, an old man who had lived through 3 different kinds of wars in his lifetime looked up at the ships, then looked back down at the soup he was cooking, and turned the heat down so it wouldn't burn. The soup needed another 20 minutes. He had 20 minutes. He was not worried. The sovereignty hit Kepler Station first. It made sense strategically. Kepler Station sat at the edge of human colonial space like a front tooth, visible, symbolic, the kind of target that sent a message before the real work started. Taking it quickly would demonstrate to any species watching that this was not going to be a long war. The sovereignty had done this before. Pick the visible target, break it fast, watch everything else decide resistance was not worth it. They sent 90 ships. Humanity had 31 at Kepler Station when the engagement started. By every number the sovereignty's war council had run, this was not a battle. This was a formality. The kind of thing you list in the first paragraph of a conquest report. Resistance encountered at forward station, neutralized within standard time frame, before moving on to the parts that actually required attention. The Sovereignty Fleet Commander, a being named Vel Orath who had overseen 16 conquest engagements without a single setback, arranged his ships in the standard crescent formation and opened fire. The human ships scattered. He noted it with satisfaction. Scattering was textbook yielding behavior. Species scattered, then regrouped at a safer distance, then either fled or submitted. Conquest psychology had mapped this pattern across hundreds of engagements. It was reliable, comforting even in the way that anything predictable becomes comforting when you have done this long enough. The human ships did not regroup at a safer distance. They scattered into positions he hadn't accounted for between his ships, alongside his flanks, underneath his formation in angles that forced his rear guns to track in directions they weren't optimized for. The scattering was not panic. He stared at his tactical screen for a long moment before he understood what he was actually seeing. It was a formation. They had scattered into a formation. Inside Kepler Station, Colonel Kehoe had 300 soldiers, a broken rail cannon, and a resupply line that had been cut for 9 hours. The station's lights were on emergency red. 3 sections were venting atmosphere. His second-in-command told him their odds, and Kehoe listened to all of it and said nothing, and then told her to send the odds to the recycler because they were done using them. A sovereignty officer opened a channel. His translator was good, clean, almost accent-free. He told Kehoe that the station was already designated as taken on sovereignty tactical maps. He said the number of human casualties so far. He said resistance would only add to that number. He said surrender was the rational choice. Kehoe patched the channel station-wide so every soldier in every section could hear. Then he closed it without responding. His second-in-command looked at him. He looked back at her. She picked up her weapon and went back to her post. That was the whole conversation. They kept fighting. Vel Oreth filed his first unusual report 8 hours into the engagement. It was not a distress report. He was careful about that, careful the way experienced commanders are careful, which is to say he knew exactly how his superiors read things, and he knew *distress was a word that followed a man for the rest of his career. He called it an anomaly report. The anomaly was this: the humans were absorbing casualties and accelerating. He had destroyed 11 of their 31 ships. Their station was partially compromised. By his models, this was the point at which human command would begin signaling readiness to negotiate. Instead, the remaining 20 ships were moving with more coordination than they had at the start of the battle, not less, as if the losses had organized them somehow, sharpened something. His analysts could not explain it. They ran the numbers again, then again. The numbers kept saying the same thing, and the numbers kept being wrong about what was happening. He sent the report. His superior read it and wrote back 2 words: finish it. Admiral Murray's fleet was not at Kepler Station. It was 3 systems away, and it was moving not toward Kepler, not away from it, but in a long, slow arc that looked from the outside like a fleet trying to decide what to do. It was not trying to decide anything. Murray stood at her command table with a mug of something hot and a face that her officers had learned to read carefully because it looked calm in the same way a very deep river looks calm. She was watching the Kepler engagement feeds, not the battle itself. She was watching the sovereignty fleet's response patterns, the time between an order and execution, which ships adjusted to new information quickly and which ones waited for confirmation, which formations they defaulted to under pressure, which commanders made decisions, and which ones asked questions first. She was not fighting a battle. She was reading a book. Mark the response lag on the left flank, she told her navigator. They're waiting for approval before they adjust. That's not a protocol issue, that's a culture issue. She took a sip. We're going to use that. Her navigator marked it. Murray looked at the feed for another few seconds. Then she said, "How long before Kehoe runs out of ammunition?" "Estimates say 4 hours." "Then let's be useful in 3. She set the mug down, plot the arc. The resupply run was not subtle. Murray's fleet came in loud and fast, hitting the Sovereignty's rear flank before Vel Oreth's sensors fully processed what he was seeing. He had not expected a second human fleet. His models had not included one because his models had accounted for all known human fleet positions, and this fleet had not been in any of them. This bothered him more than the attack itself. The battle lasted another 6 hours. When it was over, Kepler Station was still in human hands, damaged, missing 2 full sections, running on reserve power, but standing. Vel Oreth filed a second report. It was longer than the first. He took more care with the language. He asked for additional ships and additional time and an updated intelligence package on human fleet movements, because the one he had was clearly incomplete. He did not use the word asterisk difficult. He used the word asterisk adaptive. His superior read it, frowned at it, and approved the request for more ships. Then he called his own superior and described the situation as progressing normally with minor complications. That was the word he used. Minor. Across the sovereignty's intelligence network, a young analyst named, by human translation, something close to bright calculation sat at her desk and looked at the Kepler numbers and looked at the response time data and looked at the pattern of human tactical adjustment across the engagement, and then she started writing a new projected timeline. She had been given 6 weeks as her working assumption. She wrote 4 months instead and footnoted every number carefully so no one could argue with her math. Her supervisor rejected the report before lunch. She saved a copy to a drive she kept in her quarters, personal, offline, the kind of copy you keep when you think you might need to say "I told you so" asterisk later. She hoped she would not need it. She was fairly sure she would. On Earth, in Sohi's office, the Kepler feeds came in through 3 screens running simultaneously. She watched all of them at once, the way people watch things they have already imagined and are now checking against reality. She had a notepad open. She was making small marks, not notes, just marks, the kind of physical habit that helps a brain think. When the engagement ended and Kehoe's station was confirmed still standing, she stopped making marks and sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and slid the notepad across the empty desk beside her to where Junho would sit when he arrived in 20 minutes. She had written one number on it. 3 months. Not 4-3. She had done her own math. The Sovereignty sent their second fleet. It was bigger, faster. It carried newer weapons and a commander who had not made the mistake of underestimating the opposition. He had simply been told clearly that the first commander had made errors that he would not repeat. He believed this. He had a good record. He had taken 4 worlds in 11 years. He knew how conquest worked. He did not know that Murray had spent the entire Kepler engagement taking notes. His fleet arrived at the human defense perimeter and found something strange. The humans were using different formations than they had used at Kepler. Different tactics, different communication patterns. The signals were on channels the Sovereignty analysts hadn't mapped yet. He ran his intelligence package, and the intelligence package was wrong about at least 6 things he could immediately identify. He was a thorough man. He slowed down before engaging. He wanted better information. The problem was that slowing down gave Murray's fleet time to finish positioning. The engagement lasted 4 days. When it was over, the Sovereignty's second fleet had lost a third of its ships and had failed to take a single human position. The commander filed a report that took him 3 hours to write because he kept starting it and stopping it and starting again. He did not know how to explain what had happened in language his superiors would accept. They were expecting a report about a minor setback. What he had was something that didn't fit in that category yet, and he didn't have another category to put it in. He sent the report. The Sovereignty sent a third fleet. The third fleet was not a response anymore. It was a statement. The Sovereignty War Council met and argued for 2 hours, and the argument was really only about one thing: whether this was still a minor problem or whether it was becoming something else. And the council decided, the way councils always decide when they don't want to say the harder thing out loud, that more force would settle it. A third fleet, twice the size of the second, with orders to end this engagement before any other species in the region started forming opinions. Because species were watching. This was the part that made the council uneasy. The Vel Sovereignty had built its 6,000 years on a reputation. The reputation was simple. You did not fight the Sovereignty and survive. Not because the Sovereignty was cruel, they were not by galactic standards, but because they were inevitable. That was the word every vassal species eventually used. Inevitable. You didn't resist the tide. You learned to live with it. 22 vassal species were currently watching the human engagement feeds. They watched with the kind of careful attention that beings give to things that might change the way they understand the world. A species called the Thuvan absorbed into the sovereignty 300 years ago. Their home system, now administered by a sovereignty governor, had 3 delegates assigned to nothing but monitoring the feeds. One of them, an elder male whose species lived for 400 years, and who had therefore personally watched the sovereignty take his world, sat in front of the screens and didn't speak for a long time. He watched Kehoe's soldiers hold a position the sovereignty had marked as taken on their maps. He watched Murray's fleet do things that shouldn't work and then work anyway. He watched the human losses climb. They were real losses, significant ones. Nobody was pretending the humans weren't taking damage. And he watched the human response to those losses, which was to keep going, which was to adapt, which was to fight differently than they had been fighting an hour before. The elder watched all of this. Then he said quietly to the empty room, "We should have had more humans." Nobody was there to hear it. He said it anyway. Teal had been in neutral space for 8 months. Officially, he did not exist. His rank, his assignment, his name in any official file had been reclassified so many times that even the office that classified things wasn't sure where he was. Unofficially, he had built something inside the sovereignty's information network. Not a weapon, something more useful than a weapon. A small, careful, patient lie. He had people, not soldiers, not hackers, something harder to name, placed at key points in the sovereignty's data infrastructure. They did not steal information. They adjusted it. Small adjustments. The kind that didn't look like adjustments. A fleet position moved slightly on a report. A casualty number rounded in the wrong direction. A human supply route that existed marked as destroyed. A human supply route that didn't exist anymore marked as active. The sovereignty's generals were receiving data. Clean data, sourced correctly, formatted properly. They were making decisions based on it. The data was wrong. They were fighting a version of humanity that Teal had built for them. A version that was weaker, more predictable, and positioned in places the real humans were not. Every time the sovereignty sent a fleet to where their intelligence said the humans were somewhere else. And the somewhere else was exactly where they needed to be. The Third Fleet's engagement went badly from the first hour. Murray had moved. The fleet positions the sovereignty had mapped were empty. The ambush that shouldn't have been possible was possible. The sovereignty commander, the third one now, found himself in a battle that felt like fighting something that already knew what he was going to do. He changed his approach. They anticipated the change. He changed it again. They were already adjusted. He started to wonder about his intelligence package. He pulled it up mid-battle and found things he should have found before, small errors, the kind that only look like errors once you know what to look for. His jaw tightened. He filed an emergency report flagging possible intelligence compromise and kept fighting because there was nothing else to do. The battle lasted 9 days. The Third Fleet lost more than half its ships. And then Murray did something she was not supposed to do. She opened a wideband signal, not a military channel, a wideband receivable by any ship, any station, any species in range. She posted 2 numbers, sovereignty losses, human losses, side by side, and then 1 line of text below them. At current rate, the sovereignty loses their Third Fleet in 11 days. Mark your calendars. Her communications officer stared at her. Admiral, that's going to be received by at least 12 neutral and vassal species in this region. Yes, Murray said. And the sovereignty. Especially the sovereignty. He opened his mouth and then closed it and sent the transmission. The Sovereignty War Council received the broadcast, and the reaction was immediate and furious. They called it a provocation. They called it a bluff. They called it psychological manipulation by a species that was clearly desperate and grasping for any appearance of strength. 11 days later, they lost the third fleet. Nari was living out of a room on a neutral station when the message came. It was not an official communication. No formal header. No sovereignty seals or diplomatic formatting. Just a message, text only, from a source identifier she didn't recognize but whose routing she traced back to the Thuvan species. 300 years under sovereignty rule. She knew their history. Everyone who did this job knew their history. The message was 2 words. Hell. Nari sat with it for a while. 2 words from a species that had watched their world get swallowed 3 centuries ago, that had learned to live inside an empire they had not chosen, that were now watching something they probably no longer believed was possible. A fight that wasn't over. She wrote back 3 words. We never stopped. She sent it and sat back and looked at the ceiling of her very small room. Outside her porthole, stars sat where they always sat, patient and permanent and completely indifferent to everything happening between them. She thought about the old man at Kepler Station. She had seen the feed footage, had seen him holding the line with people who had every reason to break and hadn't. She thought about Junho, who had received the biggest military ultimatum in human history and asked how the admiral was before he asked about anything else. She thought about Sohi, who had seen this coming for 4 years and kept the file and written the date in the space she had left blank on purpose. She thought about what it meant to be a species that had never stopped. Even when stopping would have been easier. Even when stopping made more sense by every calculation. Even when the thing they were pushing against was so much bigger and older and more certain of itself than they were. They just didn't stop. The sovereignty didn't have a word for that. That was the whole problem. Junho called the Joint Command together on a Tuesday. No particular reason for a Tuesday. It just happened to be Tuesday when the numbers settled into a shape he recognized. He had been waiting for that shape for 11 months. It was the shape of a door, not wide open, not welcoming, but unlocked. Just unlocked. That was enough. He did not give a speech. He had never given speeches. Speeches were for people who needed to convince others of something, and the people in this room did not need to be convinced of anything. They needed to be shown the math and then trusted to do what they did. He put 3 star systems up on the screen. He talked for 20 minutes. Supply lines, specifically the ones the sovereignty had stretched thin, maintaining 3 consecutive fleet deployments. Doctrine rigidity, specifically the places where their commanders had shown, repeatedly, that they followed procedure even when procedure was failing them. And intelligence gaps. The gaps Teal had quietly, patiently carved into their data infrastructure over 8 months. The blind spots where human fleet movements happened without the sovereignty seeing them. 3 systems, 3 weaknesses, 1 window. We have been fighting to survive, Junho said. That part is over. We're going to make them feel the cost of starting this. He looked around the room. Nobody asked if they were ready. That was another thing about this room, they did not ask that question. Ready was a word for before. They were already in it. Ready was irrelevant. Murray said, I need updated sovereignty fleet positions from Teal before I can finalize approach vectors. You'll have them by morning, Junho said. Then I'm ready by noon. She said it the same way she said everything, flat, efficient, like someone reading a shopping list. Her fleet had been in continuous engagement for 11 months. Her ships needed repairs that had been done in stages, in rotation, while other ships covered, and then again, and then again. She had not lost a single engagement. She had also not slept more than 5 hours in any given night since the war started. Her officers worried about this. She had told them once that she would sleep when there was something worth sleeping for, and that had been the end of the conversation. Kehoe said nothing during the briefing. He looked at the 3 systems on the screen. He looked at the ground-side approach for the one they were calling Target 2. Then he looked at Junho. Junho looked back at him. "How many days do you need?" Junho asked. Kiho thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Give me the position at midnight. I'll be ready by dawn." Junho nodded. "Then we're done here." The room cleared out, fast, the way rooms clear when people have things to do that matter. Woojin had not presented his weapon to anyone yet. He had been working on it for 7 months in a facility that did not have an official address, and did not appear on any public record, and whose power consumption was routed through 4 separate civilian grids, so it looked like a city block's worth of apartment buildings using slightly more electricity than usual. He called the project BLINDSBOT. His team called it other things, most of which were not appropriate for official reports. They had been at it so long that they had stopped sleeping in normal hours and started sleeping in shifts, 2 or 3 hours at a time, rotating so that the work never fully stopped. The canteen on the lower level was always open. Someone was always eating something at 3 in the morning. That was how you knew the work was real, when people forgot what time meals were supposed to happen. BLINDSBOT was not a gun. It was not a bomb. It was not a ship or a missile or anything that destroyed matter directly. It disrupted communication. Specifically, it disrupted the sovereignty's faster-than-light communication architecture, the system that connected 40 species across thousands of star systems, the nervous system of an empire. The sovereignty used a specific frequency band, maintained by relay stations distributed through their territory, to keep their command structure functioning in real time. Without it, a sovereignty fleet in one system could not receive orders from command in another. Governors could not report to councils. Generals could not coordinate. An empire without communication was not an empire. It was 40 separate groups of confused people. Woojin had spent 7 months finding the frequency, then finding the relay pattern, then building something that could introduce enough interference from enough distance to collapse the band without destroying any hardware, because destroying hardware could be fixed quickly. Interference at the right frequency, sustained for the right period, would require the sovereignty to manually recalibrate every relay station in the affected range before communication was restored. He activated a test run on a Thursday afternoon, 43 seconds of full activation. In those 43 seconds, every sovereignty ship in a range of 60 light minutes experienced complete communication blackout. They got it back after 43 seconds. No permanent damage. Clean. Woojin's team stood around the result display, and nobody said anything for a moment. Then someone in the back said something under their breath that made 3 people laugh, and then everyone was laughing, the specific laughter of people who have been working toward a thing for so long they had stopped being sure it was real, and it was real. Woojin called Junho. He said, "It works." Junho said, "How long can you sustain it?" Woojin looked at his team. He thought about 7 months of sleepless work in a building with no address. 6 hours, he said. Maybe 7 if we push it. 6 is enough, Junho said. Schedule it. Inside the sovereignty, the fractures had already started. They were quiet, the kind of fractures that don't make sound, that happen in committee rooms and budget reports and private conversations between leaders who are starting to run the math themselves. The outer species went first. 2 of them, small, practical, always uncomfortable with how far their contribution ships had to travel, cited supply problems, reduced their fleet contributions by 30%, filed the paperwork correctly, used all the right language. The Sovereignty Administration approved the reductions because there was no formal mechanism to refuse them, and because admitting those reductions mattered would be admitting something larger. A 3rd species followed, then a 4th. The Sovereignty's high command met in private. There were 11 beings in the room and 10 of them knew, in the way you know things you are not ready to say, that the math had changed. The war was costing more than the acquisition was worth. Earth was one planet, one species. No galactic allies, no strategic resources unique enough to justify what this was taking. But 6,000 years of empire does not have a protocol for stopping. There was no form for it, no precedent in their operational history. Every war the sovereignty had entered, they had finished. Finished on their terms. The idea of leaving a conflict unresolved was, and this was the word their senior commander used, sitting at the head of the table, looking older than he had looked at the start of this, unfamiliar. That was the word. Unfamiliar. Not impossible, just something they did not know the shape of yet. Outside that room in the analyst's wing, the young analyst who had written the 4-month estimate, the one her supervisor had rejected, pulled out the copy she had saved to her personal drive. The war was now past her estimate. It was running long. She opened a new document. She titled it, Revised Assessment Conditions for Exit. She started writing. She did not tell her supervisor. Kehoe had spent 11 months defending things, holding things, being the person standing between a position and the people trying to take it. He was good at it. He had the right kind of mind for it, the kind that could look at a shrinking set of options and find the one that worked, that could take a broken rail cannon and figure out what else it could be used for, that could listen to a sovereignty officer offer surrender terms and know, without needing to think about it, that the correct response was silence. But he had also spent 11 months pushing. Not against the enemy, against the feeling, the low, constant, muscle-deep feeling of a thing that wasn't moving in the right direction yet, like pushing a door that gives a little but not enough. He had been in that feeling for so long that he had forgotten what the other kind felt like. On the night Junho gave him his coordinates, he stood at the viewport of the station and looked out at the star field and felt something shift. Not dramatically, not like something breaking or releasing, more like a change in pressure, the slow adjustment of weight moving from one side to another. He went asleep, 4 hours. When he woke up, he ate, checked his equipment, and briefed his officers. They were not holding anything today. Today they were going forward. He didn't have a word for what he felt about that. He had been looking for one for 11 months. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was something that sat between the two, something that didn't have a name because it only existed in the specific moment a very long push finally started to move. He filed his readiness report at 5 in the morning. Dawn right on time. BLINDSPOT went live at 300 hours on a Wednesday. There was no visible sign of it from the outside, no flash, no sound, no dramatic moment that someone watching from a distance could point to and say, there, that was when it changed. 1 second the sovereignty's communication network was functioning across its full range, then it was not. In the sovereignty fleet coordinating above the first target system, a commander opened his mouth to issue an order to his second ship and the channel was dead. He tried another channel. Dead. He tried the emergency relay. Dead. For 4 full seconds he sat in the silence of his bridge and his crew sat with him, and everyone was doing the same thing, checking, rechecking, looking at each other, checking again. It was not their equipment. Their equipment was fine. It was everything else. Murray moved in the first minute. Her fleet had been holding at the edge of sensor range for 6 hours, waiting. The moment BLINDSPOT confirmed active, she gave the order and her ships went forward in a formation she had designed specifically for this. For the 6 hours when Sovereignty Command couldn't talk to its own fleets, when each ship was an island, when orders that arrived before the blackout were the only orders they had. She hit 3 systems simultaneously, not in sequence. At the same time, 3 separate engagement groups, each hitting a target Junho had identified as a route, supply, coordination doctrine. Cut the route and the branches follow. Her fleet moved fast. Not recklessly fast. She was not a reckless commander, but with the specific speed of someone who has been waiting 11 months for a window and is not going to waste a single second of it. She had 6 hours. She intended to use 5 and keep one in reserve for the part she hadn't planned yet. There was always a part she hadn't planned. That was not a failure of planning. That was just honesty. Ki-ho went in on the ground. Target 2 was a sovereignty coordination hub, a station, partly built into an asteroid that had been functioning as a regional command center for the fleets in this sector. It was not undefended. It had 2,000 sovereignty security forces, hardened walls, automated gun platforms on the external approaches, and enough redundant systems that taking it down remotely was not an option. You had to go in. Ki-ho had 800 soldiers. He had spent 2 days with his officers going over the station's layout from every piece of intelligence Teal had on it. He knew which sections had the thinnest walls. He knew which security rotations had the longest gaps. He knew that the automated platforms on the northern approach tracked on a 4-second cycle, and that 4 seconds was enough if you moved correctly. His people moved correctly. The fighting inside the station was the kind that doesn't look like anything in the feeds afterward. It was close and loud and fast and utterly unglamorous. Walls and corridors and rooms that were too small and visibility that was too low. His soldiers did not fight like they were trying to win. They fought like they had already decided how this was going to end and were now just doing the work of getting there. The station fell in 4 hours and 40 minutes. Ki-ho stood in the main operations center, surrounded by people who were breathing hard and covered in things he was not going to look at closely, and he looked at the screens showing the sovereignty position feeds going dark one by one, and he felt something he still did not have a word for. He decided he didn't need one. In the 6th hour of BLINDSPOT, when the interference was at its widest reach, and the sovereignty was still hours away from beginning manual recalibration, the fractures that had been quiet became loud. The outer species had already been reducing their contributions. Now, with sovereignty communication down and no orders coming, and the engagement feeds showing 3 simultaneous human advances with no coordinated sovereignty response, some of them stopped contributing entirely. Not officially. They just stopped moving ships. When communication came back, the sovereignty's high command had a list of problems that required individual attention, and none of them could be fixed quickly. Ships that had received conflicting orders and done nothing waiting for clarification. Supply lines that had gone uncovered for 6 hours. Fleets that had taken damage without support because the support fleet 2 systems away hadn't known to move. 6 hours. It looked like more than 6 hours of damage because the damage had compounded. One thing had affected another thing had affected 3 more things. The sovereignty's empire ran on coordination. Coordination required communication. Communication had been gone for 6 hours, and 6 hours in a machine that size was enough to introduce a fault that spread. The 11th species filed formal secession, papers 2 days later. The 12th followed within the week. The 40 became 31. The Grand Emissary opened the channel himself, not through a subordinate, not through a diplomatic office. Himself, personally, which was the kind of gesture that didn't need explanation. It meant something. People who had always had power did not make direct calls unless they were prepared to say something they didn't want witnessed by too many people. Nari took the call. She looked the same as she had looked the day she smiled and said, "You should have researched us better." Same stillness, same patience, same face that gave nothing away. The emissary had thought about that smile many times in the past year. He had not understood it when she did it. He was starting to understand it now. He told her the sovereignty was prepared to discuss a cessation of hostilities. He told her the war had cost both sides significantly. He told her a negotiated end served the interests of stability in the region. He was careful about his language, not conceding anything explicitly, not admitting anything directly, but communicating everything clearly enough that she would understand. She understood. She said, "One condition before anything else is discussed. The Thuvan and every species that was incorporated into the sovereignty in the last 300 years, their original territories are returned to them. Full governance. No oversight. All of it. The emissary was quiet. He had conducted 47 conquest negotiations. He had received demands for resources, for strategic positioning, for tribute, for technology transfer. A victor demanding something for a third party, demanding it as the first condition, the non-negotiable foundation before any other conversation started. He had never encountered this. He did not understand it. He did not need to understand it. It was not a trap. He looked at her face and knew it was not a trap. She meant it simply and completely. "That is a significant concession," he said. "It's the first one," she said. "Everything else we can talk about." He agreed. He had no real leverage to disagree with, and they both knew it. But he also, and this was the part that would stay with him, believed her when she said everything else was negotiable. She was not trying to take his empire apart. She was not trying to humiliate him. She wanted the Thuvan to have their world back, and she wanted the war to end. That was it. He had been prepared for a human victory to look a certain way. It did not look like that. He wasn't sure what it looked like. Junho signed the ceasefire papers at 11 in the morning, and then went and got lunch. His aide had expected something, a moment, a word, something to mark the occasion. Junho ate rice and soup from a place near the office and sat by the window and looked at the street outside. People walked past who did not know what had just been signed. People who were going to work, or coming from it, or doing something in the middle that had nothing to do with anything. He sat there for 40 minutes. Then he went back to work, because there were still things to manage. Ceasefires required administration. The Thuvan situation needed a framework. Teal had to be extracted from neutral space. Murray's fleet needed a rotation schedule for standing down that didn't leave anyone uncovered while they did it. Kehoe needed a garrison assignment and would not be happy about it but would do it anyway. Deploy was a lot of work. The ending was not the end of the work. It was just the point at which the nature of the work changed. He wrote the final operational report that evening, 12 sentences. His aide read it and said, carefully, that it seemed short for a report covering 3 years of war. Junho said, "Length is what you use when you're not sure." He sent it. The delegation started arriving 3 weeks after the ceasefire. Not official diplomatic missions, those were coming, with all the paperwork and ceremony that entailed. These were something else. Representatives from vassal species, from neutral species, from minor powers who had been watching the feeds for a year and were now, quietly, trying to understand what they had watched. So he was the one who met them. She took each group to the same window, a long window in the building's upper level that looked out over the city. The city was not remarkable. It was loud and complicated and slightly chaotic and entirely unimpressed with its own survival. Traffic moved in patterns that seemed random but weren't. Street food vendors were set up on corners doing their business. People argued about small things and laughed about other things, and moved through their days with the specific energy of people who had decided, long ago, that life was happening whether they participated or not. She did not explain anything. She did not give a speech. She said, "We've always been like this. We just finally had an audience." Most of the delegations were quiet for a while after that. Some of them asked questions. Some of them just looked. The Thuvan elder, the one who had sat in front of the feeds for 11 months, the one who had said we should have had more humans to an empty room, he came in the last group. He stood at the window for a long time. So he stood with him and didn't hurry him. Finally he said, "How did you know you would win?" So he thought about it honestly. "We didn't," she said. "We just decided losing wasn't going to be the last thing we did." He nodded very slowly, the kind of nod that means more than a nod. "We forgot that was possible," he said, "to decide." He looked out at the city for another moment. Then he smiled, A small, very old smile, the kind that belongs to someone finding something they thought was gone. Junho slept 9 hours the night the Thuvan delegation visited. No particular reason, that night over any other. His body had simply made a decision without consulting him, and he woke up the next morning having dreamed nothing in particular. Not the war, not the engagements, not the 12 sentences of the report, not the ceasefire papers or the 40 ships over the moon or Nari's smile at the beginning of all of it. Nothing in particular. He lay in the dark for a moment and thought about nothing in particular. Then he got up and made coffee and stood at his own window, different from the one in the building, smaller, looking at a different part of the city. Same city, though. Still there. He drank his coffee. It was enough.